about 20 years ago, or a bit earlier, actually, 22 years ago, I did a study for university where I studied the playbook of a Super League club that I managed to ascertain. Can't begin to tell you where I got it from. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And I actually studied the team all year with regards to the plays that they used during the season. There were approximately 40 plays in the playbook, and I found that they used about 5% of them regularly, about another 5% of them occasionally, and the other 90% hardly at all. So what that started for me on my coaching journey was this question: are we overcomplicating it for our players? And we tend to be, as coaches, full of instructions. Yet these are players that express themselves physically in our sport. So, you know, when it comes to teaching somebody to ride a bike, you can say, put your left leg forward and rotate the left pedal 360 degrees, and then do the same with the right foot, but make sure that's a little bit later. So you can describe it like that, or you can just put them on a bike and say, away you go, and give them some cushioning if they fall over. Well, I guess rugby league coaching is a bit more towards the former, where we're trying to give too much instruction, rather than the latter, where we're doing some trial and error and in training and some guided discovery. Now, when it comes to instructions for rugby league players in your team, it's commonly thought that Albert Einstein was one of the most intelligent people on earth that's ever lived. But even he would struggle to do one of his equations, one of his scientific equations, if there was 13 people in a different coloured jersey a few meters away from him ready to smash him. So you need to keep your instructions really simple so that it can cut through the white noise of a game. And coaches can really overcomplicate game strategies and training activities too. So I once worked with a coach who used to play NRL. He was full of his own noise and loved listening to himself. And he was one of those guys who was coaching director or something at the club I was working at for a while. But really, he wanted to undermine me all the time. And even though he was pretending to be an assistant to me, I did a session and I planned it meticulously, 4 10-minute stations, and he had a station. And it took him 8 minutes to describe what he wanted the players to do in that particular drill. And they had 2 minutes to do it within the time frame. Now, do you want your players working for 8 minutes and maybe talking for 2? Or do you want them stood there listening to you for 8 minutes and working for 2 in that 10-minute slot? In my opinion, if a drill takes more than 1 minute to explain, it's too complicated. Because sometimes as coaches, we say a lot, but it means absolutely nothing to the listener. I guess many coaches coach to the gallery and they're trying to convince themselves how clever they sound, or those watching the sessions. And it seems to me that a certain coach is currently in the hot seat of an NRL club for the 3rd time in his career, did exactly that in front of an influential league figure who endorsed him to be a coach. And his coaching record, he'd be lucky if he's won 3 out of 10 games or 4 out of 10 games in his coaching record. Every 10, he's won about 3 or 4. And I guess if there is a message to underpin all that, it's not what you tell them, it's what they hear. And I guess we've suffered in rugby league as teaching has suffered from mixing up coaching theory versus reality. So a lot of the theory gets delivered by people who sit in ivory towers. They sit in air-conditioned offices and they do utopian models of coaching and either don't see or forget the real world that they were once in. I find that many people who write a lot of coaching academic texts and whatnot want to do a deeper dive into their coaching career. They actually didn't coach that much, or they weren't very successful at coaching. And they're certainly not applicable to the real world. The real world is a coach. So this could be you who has 1/4 of the field to work in, or 1/5. I was at a club last week, and the under 13s and under 14s at the club wanted to do an oppose session. Yet one coach had 1/5 of the field. He had the try line to the 20 metres. I suppose he had behind the try line too, but there's these things called the posts in the way. And the 13s coach had even less. That's sort of like the middle chunk on each side. There was drills going on. And that's the real world, and they couldn't do what they wanted to do. The real world is parents influencing things and club politics influencing things, who you should pick, who you shouldn't pick. And when you have to split your team A to B and this, that, and the other, the utopian models say, give everybody a game. But your players will know who the best is, who the least talented players are. Then there'll be the players who want to play with each other, the players who refuse to play with each other. The real world is players unavailable for whatever reason. The real world is training getting disturbed by weather or other things, so other things happening at the club. The real world is lopsided teams, where teams are a big mix of abilities, or they're a big mixture of sizes. You've got some big players, some small players, or you're coaching a big team against smaller teams, or you're coaching smaller teams against bigger teams, and obviously the pressures of having to play all your players. I guess I hope this podcast supplies some of those real world answers for you. And please, please, please keep them coming, because I want to hear them. You're listening to Lee Addison, the owner of rugbyleaguecoach.com.au, on the Rugby League Coach podcast.